So the first question will be, what have inspired you to create your first movie? Tell us something about your first work. Yes.
Well, I never had any plans to be involved in films at all. I thought I would be an academic, teaching mathematics or teaching logic. And one summer, like all other students, I needed to work to earn some money for the students. And I had a friend, I was at Cambridge University, I had a friend who was at Oxford University, who was 3 or 4 years before me, but I knew him, and he said, would I like to come and work for him in the summer? Yes, what do you want me to do? He said, well, he was now at the BBC, and his first big job, first big film, was to go to Salzburg in Austria to make a film about the Salzburg Festival, the big Mozart Festival. 45 years later, I also made a film about the Salzburg Festival, but then I was just a student. And he said, you know Salzburg a little, which I did. You speak a little German, which I did. And your job, he said, will be to carry the equipment everywhere. And the equipment in those days was extremely heavy. I mean, old film equipment, not like this. I mean, very, very heavy film equipment. So I said, fine. So after about the 3rd day when we were in Salzburg, he said, and Salzburg, as you know, this castle up here, and then the river that goes around underneath like this. And he said, tomorrow morning we're going to be filming in the castle up there. Can you get the equipment up there by 8 o'clock? Sure, I mean, that's my job, but I get the equipment up there, you see. And it was in a room a little bigger than this, but not much bigger. And he didn't tell me what we were going to film at all. And so I'm now sitting in the corner, exhausted, having got the equipment up. And then the film crew arrived, and then about half a dozen students arrived. And I still couldn't figure out what it was that was going to happen, except he said, get the equipment up. And suddenly, a door opened like that, right up through. Right. A squeaky door opens just like that. And a man came in, I mean, very close to me, I mean, about a few yards away. And he came straight over to me and he said, who are you? So I stood up and I said, and he didn't need to say who he was because I recognized him. And it was the great expressionist painter, Oskar Kokoschka. So there's Oskar Kokoschka. See? Then I realised that obviously it was going to be some kind of art class because now the students were all setting up their things. You see them starting to draw. You know, Oskar Kokoschka there. And on the other side of the room, not very far away, please don't be offended, on the other side of the room over there, was the most incredibly beautiful, completely naked girl I'd ever seen in my life. So Oskar Kokoschka, this very beautiful naked girl, and I'm being paid for this. And I thought, this is the future. To hell with being an academic, I want Oskar Kokoschka and these beautiful naked girls. I've seen lots of Oskar Kokoschkas, but I can't find these naked girls. They're always disappearing. I never see them again. So at that moment, I thought, well, actually, and to be serious at that moment, I thought this would be interesting. I might get involved in this film business, which is what I did.
Okay, nice story, really. So, after that, your work was a big amount of people, famous people, with Beatles, with Lennon, Clapton, yes, with Leonard Cohen. So, and who was the most difficult to work with?
Well, you won't like this answer, but I've never found any of them difficult. I mean, they're great creative artists, geniuses like that. They're not like us. They're different. And you have to watch and listen very, very carefully because they'll tell you without saying, you're going too far, or I don't want to do that, or, you know, they're always very polite. But you can sense that they're moving somewhere else. And of course the worst mistake you can make is to try and grab them and pull them back in, if you see what I mean. I made a film once about an English football player called Bobby Moore. He was the only English captain to win the World Cup. And talking about courage, for example, I knew one thing, or two things about Bobby Moore. I knew that he was the English captain, the only English captain who won the World Cup. But the second thing is that I knew, because somebody told me, that the famous pictures where he's shaking hands with the Queen and he's holding the trophy and so on and so on, that before that occasion he'd been told he had bad cancer and he'd been ordered by the doctor not to play. It's dangerous, you will kill yourself. And the only people who knew were Bobby Moore's wife, first wife, and a manager, a man called Alf Ramsey. But Bobby Moore, to hell with that, I'm going to play. And he played. He lived for another 10 years, but I mean the cancer eventually got him. But at that moment, that's an extraordinary moment of courage to have known that he got cancer and told not to play by his doctors, but he went out and played. Right, I made a film about this remarkable man. Remarkable not just because he was a good footballer, but remarkable. And in the course of making the film, we interviewed all the other players of that team who were still alive. And in a way, the most interesting was a man called Jack Charlton, who was very tall. He was one of the centre halves, and I mean, he's an extraordinary man. And we went to interview him, and I like to interview people by a window, because then you have natural light coming in, and I'm not having to put lights everywhere. And so I'm there, and you're there, or he's there, as it were. And we're just talking about various things relating to Bobby Moore. And at one point, he stopped in the middle of a sentence, and I thought, he's either forgotten what he's going to say, or he's had enough and he wants to go. But he very slowly, he looked out of the window and he said, you know, the most important thing about Bobby Moore is that he was one of us. I mean, part of the team. He was one of us. And then he looked back and looking towards the camera and he just said, but he wasn't like us. And that was the perfect description of genius. You know, he's one of us. You know, we all get up in the morning, go to the lavatory, clean our teeth, eat, everything else. But they do something else. That something else is what makes them different from us. They're the great creative artists. So in that context, yes, they're all difficult because they're not like us. And you have to try and understand. You never understand, but you have to try and understand in what ways are they special. And then you have to watch very carefully that, as I said, they will tell you when they don't want to do something, or they don't want to answer that question, or they want to go home, or whatever it is, they will tell you. But they don't say, oh, time to go. You know, there's sort of little hints. So you have to absolutely, the moment you're interviewing these people, you are 101% awake and focused on them. And in that context, none of them are difficult. I mean, Richard Burton, who I worked with every day for 156 days. Can you believe that? We'll be making a big film about Wagner. That was an enormous strain on him. I mean, most actors, you know, do 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, 2 weeks nothing, and then 2 weeks back on. He was there every single day for 150 days. So we were putting him physically, as well as emotionally, under enormous strain the whole time. And as you know, he was famously someone who got drunk. And he did get drunk twice and apologized. And it was just the strain was too much. And then the day of drinking was difficult because he knew we had to do these scenes and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, yes, there are difficulties. But were these people difficult? No.
Okay.
They're special. That's why you make a film about it. They're special.
Right. So, one more question about movies, your movies. Maybe you have...
What was supposed to talk about Bob?
Maybe you have your favorite soundtrack among your movie soundtracks, or your favorite composer?
No, I don't. I don't have a favorite. I mean, there's some music which resonates with me over and over again. But for example, when we made since Elena mentioned it, when we made the Shostakovich film, I became so involved with, I mean, before I started the film, I knew every single piece of music that I was going to use in the film. I knew it forwards, backwards, inside out. It was constantly in my head, even before I started to make the film. I learnt it because I had to learn it in order to try and understand Shostakovich. I met Shostakovich, but I didn't make the film with him, obviously. And so that was, so that music, when I finished the film, I didn't for, I should think, 10 years go to any concert that had any Shostakovich in it. Because by the time I finished the film, I knew, or had some knowledge of, the extent to which he had suffered, both from Stalin and the political system, in order to make this extraordinary music. And I would go to a concert and people behind me are opening suite, or they're reading their program, or they're looking at their watch, when does it end? It used to make me so angry. You know, can't you just stop and listen to what this man did for us and for our time? So for years, 10 years, I refused to go to any Shostakovich concert. But the Shostakovich music is very important to me. I mean, Wagner is obviously very important to me. The composer that I happen to be making a film about is important to me. But I don't really have a favourite. No, I don't really have a favourite. Mostly because much of the music I hear played is played so badly. I mean, and Benjamin Britten tomorrow night, I mean, I knew personally very well, and I adore his music. And interestingly enough, last week I was in Spain rehearsing a new piece, a new opera that I'm going to do. And there was a quartet of students, no, they weren't students, they were sort of 22, 23, from Estonia. Now, Estonia's great composer is Arvo Pärt, a composer called Arvo Pärt. And Arvo Pärt, when Britain died in 1976, Arvo Pärt wrote a wonderful, wonderful piece of music in memoriam Benjamin Britten. And it's very simple. On the page, it's incredibly simple. But it's the most powerful, emotional, short piece I know of music, of Arvo Pärt. And the Estonians quartet, particularly the two violinists, we were talking about, you know, why had they, I asked them, did you play this? Have you played this music? Yes, we played this music. But, and how did you get on? Well, he said, we had a big row with the conductor. Why did you have a row with the conductor? Because the conductor was going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the music is not like that. Music is not 1, 2, 3, 4. There's something else goes on. And she said, you know, that the terrible thing about Arvo Pärt is because the notes are so simple that usually 9 times out of 10 it's played badly. So that's a big problem for me with Benjamin Britten. I mean, the Benjamin Britten, all the Benjamin Britten music I know, of course some of it is wonderfully played, but a lot of it isn't.
Okay, so my friend here is Yaroslav, by the way. He's interested...
Amazingly steady hands. I kept looking at the camera there, I kept thinking he's going to do this.
So he's interested in life and works of Igor Stravinsky.
Oh, Stravinsky, all right.
Yes, and he's curious to know a little bit about your relationships with Mr. Stravinsky.
With Stravinsky?
Yes.
Right. Well, it began, and again, quite by accident, really. I'd now started at the BBC, and I hadn't been there for very long. One day the phone rang, and the voice, and I knew the voice, I mean, I knew this person who was ringing me, says, it was a man called Robert Patterson, who said, I'm here in the Savoy Hotel in London, and Igor Stravinsky would like to meet you. Very funny. Fantastic. Rang again. And he said, no, he's serious. I said, come on, Robert, don't be stupid. He's never heard of me. He can't possibly heard of me. I have nothing of any interest to say to him, except, that's Stravinsky. No, he's very serious. He'd like to meet you. Well, you could not resist going to meet, somebody's asked you to come and meet Stravinsky, you couldn't resist going to meet him. So the following day I went down to the Savoy Hotel and I went to his suite and I was sitting there waiting rather nervously, very nervously. And then in came this midget, he was tiny, tiny man with a stick. But, it's very formal. Please, sit down. So I sat down. It was quite hard because, I mean, he's short and I'm tall. So, and he said, I won't do his voice, but he said, is it true that you know John Lennon? So I said, well, it is, yes. Why? He said, I would like to meet John Lennon. So I arranged for the meeting. I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened, but I know the meeting took place. So that was my introduction to Stravinsky, I mean, as a man. And they got in touch after the meeting to say they were very grateful, thank you very much, it's been very informative. Next time you come to New York, come and say hello live. So I had met him 2 more times, and we did one interview with him, in fact, which wasn't very good, but I mean, it was interviewing Stravinsky. And then when he died, I was asked to his funeral, and then in Venice. And then a few years later, I was approached then by a man called Robert Kraft, Robert Kraft was Stravinsky's sort of amanuensis and sort of son, really. It wasn't physically. And they said, we would like you to make the official 100th birthday film. Because he was born in 1882, as you know, and this was 1982 coming up. And we'd like you to make that film, and we will provide you with whatever access you need. It wasn't quite as simple as that, because at that point there were 2 bits of the family. There were the 3 children of wife number 1, and then there was Robert Kraft and wife number 2. They hated each other. And they both said, the eldest son, who was called Theodore, who was a painter, who was very nice, said to me, he said, he was perfectly straightforward, he spoke French, but he said, are you going to interview Robert Kraft? And I said, yes. And he said, then I cannot be in the film. I said, fine. Robert Kraft said to me, if you interview any of those 3 idiot children, I will not be in the film. So we had a problem. But the problem was resolved, because I said very firmly to the 3 children, listen, you know about all the early part of Stravinsky's life. I can't make this 100th birthday film without you. I said to Robert Kraft, stop being so silly. You know about the last part of Stravinsky's life, but you know nothing about it. You read, but you weren't there when these children were born. They were there. So eventually, sorted out, and did it. But I mean, I just, arguably the greatest composer of the 20th century, most important, significant composer of the 20th century, with Shostakovich and Benjamin Britten, as we've talked. And so, I wanted to make, and the important thing was that we got to everybody just in time. We got to Balanchine, who's a great choreographer, just in time. We got to the 3 children, 2 of whom died very soon afterwards. Mylène, the daughter, she's still alive, incredibly, 103 or something now. Obviously, Mrs. Stravinsky II, we spoke to, Robert Kraft, also dead. We got to 2 people who danced in the original production of Rite of Spring, Sacre du Printemps, in 1913. There were 2 dancers still alive who'd been in that production, also died soon afterwards. So that was what was really important about making the film. It was not just it was a film about Stravinsky, but we managed to get interviews with these people, this huge range of people who were there. They were first-hand witnesses about what had happened.
Thank you. We've talked about the composers, but still, what do you think? What comes first to the musicians? The lyrics of the song or the music?
It varies. It's totally different all the time, and it's totally different all the time. If you take Regice and Hammerstein, for example, I know a little bit about, as in Oklahoma and South Pacific and so on. That varied. Sometimes Oscar Hammerstein wrote the words, and then Richard Regice wrote the music. Sometimes Richard Regice said, I've got a good tune here, can you put some words to it? there's no way of knowing. I mean, the great collaborations, they happened simultaneously. I mean, just talk about Benjamin Britten, who was an opera, he was a composer of all kinds of music, but an opera composer. I mean, or even Verdi, or Puccini, the struggles that the composer went through, or Strauss and Hofmannsthal, the composer generally, in those circumstances, wants to be absolutely sure that the words and the structure of the opera are what he wants and what he needs. And then he will start to write the music. Now, there are plenty of examples around the other way, of which a very famous example is there was a British explorer called Robert Falcon Scott, who was the second man to the South Pole. He wanted to be the first man to the South Pole, but he got beaten by Amundsen, who was a much more intelligent, that's a different story. But Scott famously, on the way back, died, and they were all frozen in their tent. And so it became a legend, Scott of the Antarctic. And it's an example of true British heroism. The fact that he died on the way back is because he was stupid and he didn't make the proper arrangements. But he's a hero, Scott of the Antarctic. Okay. Now, it's a great story. Him going and coming back and dying. It's a tragic, really tragic story. And there was going to be a film made, which is a famous film. It exists, called Scott of the Antarctic. And they asked, the people who were making the film, asked a great British composer called Vaughan Williams if he would write the music. Because Vaughan Williams tended to write about great British heroes. I'm making it very simple. Anyway, and then they went away to start making the film. And they'd only been making the film for about 2 weeks before they had a telephone call, as it were, from Vaughan Williams. And they thought, crikey, he doesn't want to do the music, he's pulled out. And Vaughan Williams apparently said to the film director, I've done the music. How can you have done the music? You haven't seen the film. You don't know what, you've seen the script, no idea but I've done the music. And then they now make the film. And of course the music fitted perfectly. Vaughan Williams knew instinctively what music, it was trimmed a bit, a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, that sort of thing. And then he produced Symphony No. 7, which is based on the same music. But there's an example of one great creative artist going away and writing the music, as it were, irrelevant, in a totally separate box to the film. Now, songwriting is much the same, and opera writing is much the same. Britain had an amazing series of collaborators. Ian Forster was one, of famous poets. But he wouldn't put pen to paper until he was absolutely certain that the poet had provided what he needed. And Verdi was the same. Verdi was absolutely the same. And the terrible rows went on, not with Verdi and his various librettists. And there's a famous example of Stravinsky and Octave, which we did, was done here 2 years ago, Oedipus Rex. And Stravinsky wanted to write an opera about the Oedipus legend, Oedipus Rex. And he'd seen something that Jean Cocteau, a French poet, had done about Antigone, I think. And he thought, oh, I'll ask him. So and he knew Cocteau, of course. So he said to Cocteau, I'm going to write this thing. Could you provide me with the libretto? Oh, mon cher. As it were. Crazy people. So Cocteau provided the libretto, and Stravinsky wrote back saying, this is Wagnerian. He said, nobody understands Wagner librettos, even Wagner. So Cocteau said, mon cher, I'll do another one. Fear not. Back it comes. And Stravinsky said, this is Verdi. Nobody understands Verdi. Back, mon cher, fear not. So back comes number 3. And Stravinsky was very pleased by this, because he said, this is like Puccini, very simple. So there's an example of, the back and forth.
Okay, I guess the last question will be, after all you've said now, what do you think about today's culture, including cinema, literature, music, world culture and the
Oh, world
Ukrainian
culture.
culture, if you know something about this. Yes.
Well, I mean, if you deal with film first, I think this is a golden age of film. I mean, there's many remarkable films being made. Unfortunately, you hardly get a chance to see them. You see what I mean, I just give you two examples. There was an astonishing film made in Hungary called Son of Saul. Did you see that? No. There's an amazing film, well, it won the Oscar Best Foreign Language Film, and I think Palme d'Or in Cannes, but nobody's seen it. I went to a cinema and saw it before other people. I thought it was one of the most extraordinary films I'd ever seen. There's a new film called Cold War. You seen that? No. There was another film called Ida. Have you seen that?
Perhaps I've heard of it.
No, I'm not blaming you. But I mean, there's three really great films, really, really great films. Now, when I was your age, and I was at Cambridge, there was a little cinema, terrible projection, terrible sound, very uncomfortable chairs, but I went all the time. And there I saw the films which have influenced me ever since. Lots of different films, but for example, two in particular. Seventh Seal, probably the greatest film I think ever made by Ingmar Bergman, and Wild Strawberries. And those images and the intellectual drive of those films stayed with me. I mean, from age 18 or whenever I saw it till now when I'm 103. I mean, absolutely stayed with me. But in those days, everybody would go to see Ingmar Bergman. Everybody would go to see Fellini. Everybody would go, or not everybody, but if you see what I mean, many, many people, they were part of the mainstream of our film culture. You would all go and see 8½, or Dolce Vita, for the great Fellini films. Now, Ida, Cold War, never heard of. Son of Saul, never heard of. The fact that they win international prizes is in a way an illusion, because you think, oh, they must be popular. As Leonard Cohen famously says in Bird and the Wire, you know, the fact that I'm popular doesn't mean that I'm any good. Yeah. And you know, so that's a really important thing to remember. That in terms of films being made, I think this is an absolute golden age of that kind of film. And of course, the sad thing is that the really commercially successful directors, well, Coppola was, and not anymore, but Spielberg and so on and so on, they know that that's where the stuff is being made. And the famous example of Kagemusha, the great Kurosawa film, and the later one, Ran. Kurosawa had been out of work for 25 years. He couldn't get a job. And Spielberg apparently said, whatever happened to Akira Kurosawa? So he found out, and of course Spielberg has now made E.T. and Jaws and hasn't made Jurassic Park yet. So they found that Kurosawa was out of work. So Spielberg and Coppola and one or two others gave him money to make sure that he made more films. So they know, but it's the people who run the cinemas, the distributors, who won't show these films. And thank God for Spielberg and Kurosawa, for example. Astonishing.
Yeah, and what about literature?
Oh, literature.
Yeah.
Well, I'm fed up with reading second-rate novels, so I tend not to. I mean, I'm only speaking about European literature, because I don't speak Ukrainian, I don't speak Russian, so I don't know. So I'm speaking from the point of view of ignorance here, but as far as Western literature is concerned, do I think that the people who win the Booker Prize in England, the most important international Booker Prize, are any good? I don't know, but I don't think so. I mean, Salman Rushdie, for example, I think is the most boring writer ever invented in the Western Hemisphere. But you say Salman Rushdie to most people, oh God, I don't think that. So I think literature on the whole is trying to find its role, its voice now. And that's also true of poetry as well. I mean, Ted Hughes is dead, but Bob Dylan is still going.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
It's a
Palmer.
pleasure. Sorry to keep you waiting. I didn't realise that. I thought that was the people who were saying.
It was very interesting, and we hope that for our viewers it will be interesting.